Okay, it looks like our little counter is running. Oh, let's get our show on the road. Welcome to Evolution Hour 5 in the Trump administration of doom, which will be a most exciting and disturbing year. Okie doke. Whoops. Hitting the wrong button on there. And back. Okay. As you can see, here we are in our regular digs. In the cool of the evenings, like 19 degrees in Spokane. There are lots of places a lot worse, and there hasn't been any snow yet this year, which may be kind of an anomaly if we don't get any snow at all by the end of this by spring. Anyway, we are proceeding. Isn't that a cute little tyrannosaur on the front end of the Creationist Titans books that we have been analyzing for the past umpteen forever? And we're concluding the marine critters section. They're about to go into pterosaurs, and they happen to allude to the Japanese plesiosaur. This is going to be an item that will be discussed in greater length in Rocks for Their Volume 2, where we're going into the whole cryptozoology thing and how creationists, bless their little heart, have a kind of divided mind about how much of the mythology that critters of the pre-flood world have survived to now, like dinosaurs and pterodactyls and plesiosaurs and the like. Oh, hi, Barbara. The Japanese plesiosaur is an old crusty tale from the 1970s, where a Japanese trawler brought up what was actually a basking shark carcass, but it looked sort of drippy and long and thin, and some creationists at the time jumped on it and pounced that claimed it was actually a living plesiosaur. Sarfati and Tay are far enough down the road that they know that there was quite adequate blowing to smithereens on this argument, and there were some creationist papers by a guy named Jerlstrom in 1998 and 1999 that basically agreed with the rotting shark model. So they're on fairly safe grounds in that respect, but is how they avoid connecting that up with the creationist worldview. So all Sarfati and Tay say is that some had discussed this. Only some older works had brought up this matter. They didn't identify them as creationist works. So if you were in the know, you would recognize, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, what was going on, but they didn't cite any of it. They didn't call attention to any of the ones, which, of course, as we'll be showing in Volume 2 of The Rocks Are There, is a big mountain of creationists over the years, including since either 1999 or right up to the present. So this is a trope that is not as popular as it used to be, but it still shows up, particularly among people who have drawn on, hi Lisa, particularly people who have drawn on older creationist material and not bothered to get up to date on the subject. While we're on the topic of Volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, right at the moment, I'll give you an update about where I'm at in my writing end of it. I have taken on the task, or rather Jackson said, would I do that section on the cosmology stuff, which would include creationist discussion of the origin of the universe, Big Bang criticism, origin of the solar system, asteroids, comets, and all that kind of stuff. And it's quite a fun little field, and I have a mammoth amount of material. I'm leading off with a discussion of thermodynamics, which is a little trope that we didn't just go into in much detail, just briefly alluded to, I think, in Volume 1. And it doesn't pop up in any of the other chapters, but I thought it fit quite nicely in the cosmology chapter. And so at the moment, I've been knee-deep in developing all of that. And one of the things that have come up along the way, and had in fact discussed thermodynamics in one of his discussions, and he was aware of quite a lot of little technical papers that are kind of like how scientists apply the thermodynamic argument. For those of you who aren't up on your thermodynamic stuff, and how this fits in with creationism, because to some extent it's not as obsessive an issue today in the 2020s than it was back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and particularly in relation to primarily two critters who were the main pushers of this in the creationist community, which was Henry Morris and Duane Gish. Morris, in fact, creationists love thermodynamics, but they don't want to know what it means exactly. These are not to be confused, of course, with Newton's laws of motion. So thermodynamics tracks back to Lord Kelvin in the late 19th century, that was really working out the principles of these things. And the two that play a part in the creationist is law number one, which is conservation of energy. Energy is neither created or destroyed. Law number two, second law of thermodynamics, is basically heat goes from hot to cold and every other way around. And counterpart in entropy, that the disorder of a closed system increases over time. It never goes back down. So this is why things disintegrate, and it's why if you put an ice cube out on your way, it will eventually melt. That's all the strictures of thermodynamics. It's interesting as to how creationists got into this gig, and it turned a very narrow group of apologetics that we'll be going into in more detail in the book. But effectively, it's just one person in the 1940s creationism who was kind of bringing this argument up, and it really impressed Henry Morris, which means the universe couldn't have always have been here. Yeah, that's part of the thing about the eternity of things. That's quite valid, both old Earth creation and young Earth creationism and intelligent design. Although that the universe couldn't always have been here, doesn't explain if you go back to a starting point for the universe. Is there something before that this universe came from? There's no way of telling. All the physics goes tilt at that point. So it doesn't actually resolve the issue or resolve the issue of which magic spurgle gods are involved in the construction of universes. And so there's a big philosophical side issue. Hi, Brian. I'm getting a little sidebar here on the exciting fixing my range. The young Earth creationist, and it is almost exclusively young Earth creationist people who bring up thermodynamics. The one exception to this is Granville Sewell over at Intelligent Design Land, and he's been having back and forths, and it kind of filters slightly back into young Earth creationism on this point. And also, there are some really weird little niche areas where the thermodynamic argument popped up. The wacky French UFO believers, the Raelians, latched on to thermodynamic and radioactive dating problems, basically reprising crap that they copied from young Earth creationists. And then there's also a particular form of Rogerian nurse therapy that involves like therapeutic touch that has also ripped off little bits of thermodynamic arguments. Go figure. So we'll be covering all of that in delicious detail in volume 2. But one of the little sidebars that comes up about the notion of about applied thermodynamics turns out to relate to, and it's known by various names, citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle or TCA and the like. Depends at AIG like thermodynamics too. There's an interesting little sidebar on that as well. There's a particular creationist, Tommy Mitchell, who is the poor sacrificial lamb who is called upon. This basically took place around the 2010 period of dumping on some of the favored creationist tropes that were occurring in the dumosphere. And so he put up a post saying, don't use the wise thing. This is a really bad argument. He also said the notion that thermodynamics began with Adam's sin, the second law begins with Adam's sin. This is a really bad idea. And the reason is if you start thinking it through, what? Are they claiming that until Adam's sin, thermodynamics didn't run? So that I performing spontaneously out of a hot brain chemistry wasn't going on, because every one of those things involves thermodynamic energy transfers. So it's not exactly a topic that they've thought through very well. Anyway, Mitchell is the one who was called upon to say, don't do this argument, which doesn't always work outside of the AIG bunker. So you've got some people at ICR and people at CMI that are still kind of pushing it. And then there's a small group. There's Andrew McIntosh, the wacky young earth creationist over in Britain, who's just still pushing it. And so it's a kind of like niche little area that if you have apologetics that is either following up on old Henry Morris, old Dwayne Gish, or more recent McIntosh or Granville Sewell, that's the threads that you will see still kind of sort of reading the thermodynamic argument. It all upon the idea versus closed systems and so forth. But anyway, back to the Krebs cycle. The citric acid cycle is a really interesting little whirligig of shifts things going on, and plants in particular make use of it. There's various genes involved, which some of which are located in mitochondria, and then some of them have been moved over to nuclear genes. But there's a little sidebar to this, because the reverse of the Krebs cycle is also a thing, cleverly called the RTCA. And it is thermodynamically more favorable than the Krebs cycle, which is kind of like a ratcheting up against entropy bit and requires a lot of enzymes and so forth and so on. So the creationist position will be, well, see, there has to be all of this biology designed by the beneficent designer to make this work, but it's not, because of thermodynamics that the thing is interesting. So Jason Lisle doesn't bring this up. Lisle, ironically, the chapter title for the cosmology chapter is Twinkle, Twinkle, Lisle's Stars. Lisle is a cosmology figure, and he is not the one who is really pushing this kind of argument anymore. He comes up also because he is the one writer of the one chapter in the Answers books that is more recent on the cosmology topic. They had a completely different chapter, presumably written by, who knows, Ken Ham Baumgartner or somebody, or maybe Russell Humphreys, because it was really pushing Russell Humphreys back in 2000. But all of that got junked when Lisle comes on the scene, and he flushes all of the speed of light stuff by Setterfield and that out of the thing. Krebs cycle gets 3 ATP out of 2, I think. Yeah. And it's related to a whole bunch of stuff. Anyway, there's quite a lot of recent papers that have been delving into this reverse Krebs cycle thing as related to metabolism that could have occurred very early in the origin of life. That apparently in a metal-rich environment, it's thermodynamically favored in forming this cycle, and it also involves fewer enzymes than the more standard Krebs cycle, the non-reversed one. And apparently also even in aqueous environments that don't involve catalysts. This has also been done in a paper that just came out a couple of years ago. So we'll be alluding to all of that in a cute little info box in the cosmology chapter. I'll be delving into an awful lot of material. The principle that I do in breaking all of this stuff down relates to finding out, first of all, what the science data are. Secondly, what the creationist claims are. And third, what are the various counterings that anti-creationists have brought up to bring these things up? So the scholarship of how the material has moved on. The Big Bang objections is an absolute obsession. They've got to get rid of it. You'd think they could just be happy and say that the creator of the universe went Big Bang 6,000 years ago and run with it. But the problem is that entails a mass of physics that can't be compressed down into a short time frame. So it's that 13 billion year ago thing with that, because they in order to although there are some creationists who kind of just simply telescope everything down or change the speed of light. That's part of the arguments that Jason Lisle has tried to do, is to have like light being infinite for a part and then not. And that, of course, has cosmological consequences in that as well. So it's shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic in any fundamental sense. There's going to be also tons of stuff. There's a lot of this older creationist material is so hilarious that gets completely flushed down the toilet in modern apologetics. Russell Humphreys arguing that that the core of the Earth actually had a big bubble of highly compressed water rather than molten metal the way that we think actually, which is all part of the fountains of the deep that go up to the little cracks. He put that out for a while and then kind of dropped that subject in a hurry. And a lot of the little sidebar things, the idea that the expansion of the universe sucked the heat out of the thing, all the heat that's being formed from hyper fast radioactivity in the rate kind of thing, that maybe that was a way of getting it. But then again, the universe is so ginormous that's if that model is correct, it's sucking too much energy out and it freezes the planet. So it's just absolutely hilarious. Energy comes in the oxidation. Yes, it's not. Well, it is an intricate little thing, and but there is an absolutely a wonderful amount of technical literature on how the components come about naturally, how they're interacted. The elements of the citric cycle all date back to bacteria, and there's a whole thing about how it got shuffled around, and it's now regarded that this process is related to the development of the eukaryotes because it's connected up to the mitochondria and endosymbiotic processes. And anyway, all of that's going to be material that we'll be having in the new book. Ain't science fun? Now the little part 2 of today's show or tonight's show is a little bit on some more origins or bust stuff from Don Batten. He's been keeping up buffing the old argument at CMI, and an old 2013 origins or bust bit that he had. He's updated it last year, and I'll be putting the links up to that, which is only a reminder of how ancient the thing is. But one thing that popped out in me about this had to do with one of the terms that he jumped across, which are heterocycles, which is a thing that I had not actually heard about as a big deal in my brain. But then again, I'm not familiar with everything in the universe, as difficult as that may be to imagine. And the reason why that jumped out at me is because there had been a paper by Rodriguez 2019 in Nature, which I'll be putting the full text link up to, which was about those heterocycles and how they've found verification for this process within actual biological community. So there is a matter of how the creationist is running off of a very antiquated data frame and not keeping up with the Joneses, and the actual scientific community just keeps advancing and working things out. So it's a fun measurement that we try to do in all the whole Rocks project, and my general tip work is to keep kind of track of how far into the actual scientific world our cute little creationists managed to get. And it's still confirming my general estimate that they're missing 90% of the data field. So it can be a delightful little activity for anybody that wants to get in the gig the same way that I am here on our old little YouTube thing, is if you have a specialty that really interests you, just as Flint Dibble does that in archaeology, and Paulogia does that on the more religion theology end of it, Erica with her Gutsick Gibbon with her anthropology material and human evolution stuff, Dapper Dinosaur with all of his stuff on various paleontological matters, and so forth and so on down the road, that everybody can marshal their best expertise, and along the way, just incorporating a ring that's not carbon, any chemist would recognize the term. Yeah, it's if you're gonna downgrade things and say that there's science and material that the creationists ought to have really paid attention to, well, duh. It's ironic actually how some of the big pushy ones in this tend to be chemists, although there was a creationist chemist that we'll be alluding to in a footnote from quite a long time ago, back in the 70s, when this argument was starting to try to gain traction, because Henry Morris brought it up constantly. He was really keen to bring this up when he was doing debates. But this fellow wrote a letter into the old American Scientific Affiliation thing where he says, I'm not an evolutionist. I don't buy into that. But the thermodynamic argument's really bad. Walter Lammertz and Tinkle, who was both of them founders of the Creation Research Society, were not big on the thermodynamic argument. So there's interesting little sidebars on this stuff as to who was impressed with it and who wasn't. And we'll be all putting all that in the thing. Some of the stuff, probably one of the earliest Well, Lord Kelvin also pops up in our discussion, aka William Thomson, and he was knighted and then became Lord Kelvin. And Kelvin is one of the progenitors of the argument, because he was the one who, as an authority figure, was calculating how old he thought the Earth was, and he'd come up, and the sun as well. And so he was coming up with like 100 million years, and then whittle the Earth down, in fact, only 20 or 40 by the late 1890s. And it, ironically, the usual trope is that the discovery of radioactivity was the thing that really undermined his dates. But it turns out he was wrong independent of that. And that this was in fact known at the time, that there were problems with his thermodynamic argument. There was his very assistant, John Perry, had brought up the notion of convection, and how when you took that into account, the formulas that he was using just were inaccurate. So the kinds of heat radiative things that he was working to put an upper boundary on the age of the Earth were just faulty. And in fact, that had this convection idea been looked at more assiduously, because everyone was deferring to Lord Kelvin as the super authority, we might have gotten to plate tectonics and continental drift faster, because that's ultimately connected to convection currents inside of the Earth. So a little bit of sidebar also, which we will be alluding to in the technical literature on that. So Kelvin comes up in some rather interesting ways in the matter, and I couldn't even avoid doing a shameless plug for Paralogues of Phileas Fogg 2, because Lord Kelvin shows up in the novel, and I contrast how I treat him with how the Jackie Chan Around the World in 80 Days movie figured him. Talk about weird connections to Jules Verne. That for those of you who haven't seen the Jackie Chan version of Around the World in 80 Days, it's actually a fun little movie. I mean, it's quickly paced, and it's cute. They junked the entire plot of the original movie pretty much, and kind of are vague about what year anything is in. It's sort of floating around from the 1870s to when, because it's got young adult Wright brothers showing up in the story, which is completely incorrect for the chronology. There's a whole mess of it. But anyway, Lord Kelvin is kind of a villainous character who's deriding Phileas Fogg for his belief in dinosaurs and evolution. And well, my version of Lord Kelvin is much nicer. He's still wrong on the age of the Earth, but he shows up in my novel because he was at the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876 to see Alexander Graham Bell's telephone display. And he had kind of come over for a big conference on that, and he was there, and he was not disparaging of Bell at all. In fact, there were quite a lot of people in the audience, including a lot of reporters, that thought it was some kind of a trick, that wasn't really true. And Kelvin, he wasn't Lord Kelvin by then. He was still just Sir William Thomson. In fact, I'm not even sure he'd been knighted yet. At any rate, he my version, I would contend, is more historically accurate. He's not a figure that deserves derision, because he was a brilliant scientist, but he did have his limitations. He also had kind of a doubt about the idea of heavier than air flight, and he had some quirky things, maybe critical of X-ray for a flash of a second. But some of the quotes that are attributed to him, nobody can actually find that he was actually saying some of these things. So we have to be wary about that. I can recommend it. Is of course, naturally, we want to have my Paralogues story on your shelf. Because if you like Jules Verne and Around the World in 80 Days, I think you're going to really like Paralogues of Phileas Fogg. And plus, if you haven't read the original Verne novel, you won't need to, because I've embedded his entire plot in my narrative, except widescreening it out to have a broader perspective. The David Niven film is still a masterpiece, won Best Picture in 1956. And apart from its ludicrous historical inaccuracies and breezy eccentricities, is still a fun little story. And Jackie Chan is fun to deal with. One of the little quirky parts, Chan has a fight with a villain in the an interior of the Statue of Liberty, which warehouse somewhere. That, by the way, the thing about that is because the thing wasn't the game for the Centennial. Well, both Torch and the Kerr used as advertising things to write for the big pedestal, because they had the statue pretty much coordinated, but not where to put it or what to stick it on. And it wasn't until the 1880s that they finally raised up enough money for Hunt's big elaborate base to be built. But anyway, the Torch was disassembled as a unit and put on display at the Centennial exhibition in 1876 in Philadelphia. And then immediately after the fair was over, it was moved and planted in the middle of Madison Square in New York as an advertisement, and stayed that way all the way down until they needed to pull it out when they finally built the statue fully. The head was on display for a while at the Paris exposition in 1878, which that exposition is going to be figuring in Paralogs 3, where all sorts of nefarious things are afoot with the solar furnace that was on display there. And there's a lot of things with stolen rubies and nefarious smugglers and rather nasty characters from Burma trying to get the rubies back. And then we've got Russian spies and mysterious chessboards and Impey Barbicane's humongous difference analytical engine that is the Babbage computer that he uses to do stuff. I've got a lot of fun stuff in book 3. Anyway, I'm breaking up again. I'm not getting any indication of that from my end. I can never see that. So the only sign that I ever have that there are direct video problems is if the counter stops. So if there are potential breakups, this is a chintzy little thing that I'm doing here. It's not as sophisticated. But then again, we get glitch ups in that with the people that shell out a ton of money for some of these services. So I can at least say I'm not paying for this, so I'm getting my money's worth. Anyway, let me put my little thank you note for our viewers who have joined our merry little brigade and helped out at the Patreon level. I will put my usual caveat on the colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friend levels that with the coming economic mess, if there's any difficulties people have for keeping up their patronage, I'll bite the bullet and just pull the plug. But for all of you who can stay with me, I much appreciate it, because it supplements the Social Security and the little trickle of book royalties. I am envious of Mr. Trump, our current convicted felon president, in one sense. Going to have the Chicago World's Fair and incorporate. Both Sherlock and Mycroft Holmes play recurring characters in the Fog series. Holmes is usually showing up under a pseudonym in the tales, and it's really quite a ways down the road, I think probably into the 1890s, before the Fogs are actually formally introduced to dear little Sherlock. The Chicago World's Fair in 1893, yes. Well, in fact, I'm a World's Fair groupie, and I absolutely love these things. So we, of course, have the Centennial Exhibition in Book 2, and then the Paris Exposition of 78 in Book 3. We'll have the 1889 Paris Exposition, the one where the Eiffel Tower was built. When we get to that period, the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, the Paris Exposition again in 1900, and the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. All of those sprinkle across the timeline of the big dozen books, which extend out to 1908 and beyond, because Mr. Fogg, after all, is the time traveler from H.G. Wells, and therefore he's got a little time machine. And starting in 1897, has a flying time machine, the Astronaut, that can move in both space and time. It's not bigger on the inside than the outside. It's not a TARDIS, but it'll be quite nice. Oh yes, $8 a dozen. Oh yes, yeah. The bird flu was the primary trigger for egg prices, but there's already just ginormous problems about infrastructure. There were some apparently spots down in California where 70% of the people who would normally be picking the orange crop ain't there. And so you're going to have a lot of products that'll just be rotting on the vine. Maybe Donald Trump will command the army out. You think maybe we could get Elon Musk out there to pick some rutabagas or something? That would be an amusing sight. I'm still hoping he actually is on Mr. Trump's Mars flight before the administration is done. And let's see how quickly he can push that one. I'm sure he'll want to be the first man on Mars to put his little flag down and then do his little Sieg Heil salute and his little happy dance. Anyway, well, Lisa, I must say that Trump would be giving idiots a bad name if he were just an idiot. I think it's a serious argument to be made that he does in fact have that prefrontal dementia. His tendency to lean forward and all of that is one of the diagnostic figures. And his brain is cycling around ever smaller little drains. And so he's obsessing on stuff, the desire to get Greenland and all of that. And of course, he's still obsessing on the 2020 election and repeating the election lies there. The ones that I have the most contempt for, obviously, are his enablers and the spineless jellyfish in the air quotes Republican Party who just confirmed idiot Hegseth as the Secretary of Defense. By the way, it was a tiebreaker vote there. It's why Vance was there to break the tie. Some Republicans voted against him. I think McConnell voted against him. But it was 49, and all it needed was that one more vote. Oh, yes, look at his drooping face. Yeah, that's also a possibility. It wouldn't surprise me if, as his health and mental condition continues to deteriorate, that Thiel pushing Vance will try to get a court coup and have Trump removed from office under the 25th Amendment. And so that would make Vance President 48. Of course, by then, I'm expecting the economy to be collapsing and inflation will be through the roof and stock market crashing and Bitcoin blowing up to smithereens and all the wonderful, fun things that will be coming from policies that are harebrained screwball bad. Think the Harrison 1890s depression plus big sprinkles of Herbert Hoover in there, because we've got literally the same level of income disparity and wealth distribution problems that we had in 1929. We had the 1920s saw a curtailment of the immigration, that we had open immigration all during the later 19th century, other than the Chinese Exclusion Act. So Trump, in one of his delusional moments, actually was saying how wonderful the economy was we're the richest ever from the 1870s into the early 20th century. Excuse me, but we had two ginormous depressions in that period from 1870 on. The one from 1873 to 77 that was so bad that it rippled outward. Britain was in a slump all the way into the 1880s. We allude to this kind of in the Paralogs novels. The only question is how they can do it without his MAGA base revolting. Well, yes, we must admit that the MAGA base is pretty revolting. They're going to have to face much more of a problem if the economy falls apart, because now if you have millions of MAGA people who are not only looking at prices going up at the stores and their crops having problems, and if he gets rid of FEMA, most of the FEMA aid has gone to red states, Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. Are they going to fend for themselves? Plus the fact that if you've got a lot of them unemployed, if we're skirting up to 5, 10, 15% unemployment or more, it's going to be a real mess. And then they can start taking a look at, maybe they don't want to have a government run by greedy oligarchs who are sucking the nation dry. And this may be the stimulus then, as the previous depressions were. It's no coincidence, sad to say, that the big trust busting period came as a result of Teddy Roosevelt becoming president and a bunch of progressive governors, including and mayors, including full out socialists, as a result of the big 1890s depression. And then the next bit, of course, was occurring literally in the middle of the Hoover Depression as we swung over to the New Deal under FDR. So all of this is critical about the idea that you need to have people who are articulate and effective leaders to be able to marshal the outrage that's going to be popping up at the grassroots level. And we need piles of Ocasio-Cortezes and Elizabeth Warren and Kathy Porter or Karen Porter, Kathy Porter, I think, who she lost out to Schiff for the Senate seat in there, but she, all the one with the whiteboard in Congress. I mean, there's no shortage of people, and for that matter, Adam Kinzinger, former Republican, he's probably going to rebrand as a New Style Democrat. We'll see how things come on. So it's going to be an interesting time for a while there. Just made a supportive speech for the far right. Oh yeah, he would like to see all that extremist oligarch helping element all over the place. The man is currently the richest man in the world, but that's on paper. And it's not necessarily the case that that's going to be there permanently. I think eventually Tesla will be so pushed out of shape about sales and brand identification that they will bump Musk out of the company because they can't afford the publicity, that people will just not be buying Teslas. I know quite a few people who either are sadly regretting owning a Tesla or absolutely adamantly never would buy a Tesla, where before they were really kind of looking for one because of how Musk has turned out. So it's going to be a very, very interesting thing. Yes, people are dumping Tesla. Yes, and the one, most of the Tesla product line was developed by somebody other than Musk. The one little baby that he has nursed along is the Cybertruck, the soul of Yugos. Just the sort of vehicle that a kid who hasn't grown up from 14 would think to devise. It's not terribly a good truck, and it's immensely expensive. If you want an expensive truck that actually does stuff, buy an Evian. So you can do that. Yeah, Nazis are Nazis no matter what tag they use. Exactly. And you can always spot at the website level, the extreme right Nazi types will have flags that look suspiciously like the flags that the German Navy was using during World War II, or things that are highly stylized versions of swastikas. So they tend to brand themselves in the same way that the KKK types and that just can't resist the stars and bars from the Confederacy. So, you know, they self-label, self-brand. And there's going to be an awful lot of difficulty. We're going to see just how much is going on in the courts. Quite a few of the Trump imperial decrees are blatantly unconstitutional. Certainly the ones where he's trying to get rid of birthright citizenship, it flat out slams into the 14th Amendment. And so if the Supreme Court eventually wiffle waffles on it, it would be yet another disgrace of the idiots that we got put on the court, which then reminds us, you can't afford to have Republicans in charge of the Senate or the presidency, because that's how they get these people on the courts. So absolutely everybody who doesn't like what any of these court rulings, if they don't translate that into, for God's sakes, we can't be voting for Republicans, then they're clearly not getting the memo as to how the government operates. So anyway, yes, and it has a bulletproof body, but not bulletproof windows. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting times that we are going to be dealing with. Can't avoid really kind of the political commentary because as I have been lecturing in one form or another, Tortugan minds should not be in political power. And Trump is a Tortugan, and I would put J.D. Vance in that category, and masses of the air quotes GOP fall into that category. You can measure some of these things by some of the other views they have. I mean, anybody who is a young Earth creationist is functionally got to be a Tortugan mind, and there are quite a few young Earth creationists, including Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. Ta-da! What could go wrong with somebody of that kind of a mindset, impervious to data, capable of believing anything that fits the dogma and oblivious to anything that doesn't? These people should not be in power. And so then that translates farther down the road to the idea that we really need to have source methods become ingrained both in our educational system and in our media to where we are directly quizzing politicians before they even get into power during the running for office stage to deal with the idea about what their source field is and to what extent they have any capacity to fact check a damn thing. And if you're getting Tortugan alerts on these people, and some of them will be Democrats that you would be getting Tortugan alerts on, RFK Jr., as a air quotes ex-Democrat, now Trump lackey, who will be, if he gets confirmed for his health position, will functionally make the federal government pointless in this area. And I know nobody in Washington State and our health services here, and I'm sure many other states will follow the same thing. We just won't pay any attention to the if they start putting out claptrap. But they're going to try to curtail information, they've already shut down websites, so they're trying to keep information out. They don't want any information to be disseminated that doesn't fit the dogma that would be fitting for Tony Perkins and the Family Research Council. So it's follow the money. This is GEGO. The company makes a fortune off of ICE raids. Yeah, the whole bit about and private prisons and gun manufacturers and real estate hucksters. A big chunk of people in the first Trump administration were people who had made a ton of money ransacking cheap property that they were getting from the 2008 property meltdown. So this is a robber baron on steroids thing that was the case with the McKinley administration until Teddy Roosevelt started cleaning up shop. Trump wants to go back functionally with the spoils system of having only Trump loyalists in there. Well, that's the way that we had prior to the civil service system. And was it corrupt and venal? Yeah. But Mr. Trump is a historical illiterate, and many of the people around him are marinated in PragerU propaganda. So what the hell can we do? Private prisons should be illegal, yes. I'd like to nationalize the rail beds, too. There's a whole bunch of little things that maybe we'll be able to get to do if we have genuine progressive upsurge where we've got enough people to do things like a New Deal level revisions. And depression may very well be the operation that will inspire people to do that. La-dee-da. So anyway, let me put up my little advert for the wee little volume number 1 here. Come on, get my little file up going. Oh, there we go. And I will always thank again dear Peter for doing this, as well as my little opening advert. I lack the technical skills for these things, but he did these and it was all gratis. I didn't have to pay a dime for it because I don't have any money to do that. And he loves the channel enough that he did it the same way he's done all the video openings for Jackson. It's wonderful stuff. Gives us a little bit of glitz and gives the impression that we are more sophisticated than we actually are. However, I can do words and I can do research, and therefore I can put together my expertise, which may not be making pretty little pictures or graphics or music soundtracks, but the content, I'm proud of what I do. And as a retiree, I think I'm contributing something more than I was when I wasn't a retiree. So la-di-da. And although maybe I wouldn't want Amazon to be the ultimate arbiter of these things, that's the point of, I can eventually get to the point where things will be massive enough that regular publishers, if assuming we still have that in the Trump information depression world, we'll see. It's going to be an exciting little time. Anyway, crossing fingers, we're hoping then by the end of the year, we may have Rocks 2 out, or early 2026. We'll see how that goes. And I'm also zipping along with Paralogs 3 along the sidebar. We're just going on in the steamy summer of 1876, and material that's going on up in Hartford, Connecticut, or Connecticut, as our malevolent Russian countess would call it. That was a cute little joke about the fact that actually I've heard Russians pronounce Connecticut, Connecticut. They see the things and they pronounce it phonetically. So yeah, we need a major system overhaul. Exactly, Lisa. And I've been frustrated seeing the failure of that to occur when it was so easy or obvious to do. The revision of the Bush tax code, which had lowered the tax rates for the wealthy too much, down from 42% when we had budget surpluses under Clinton, very, very briefly, and then made even worse by the 1.7 trillion windfall to the rich under Trump. And even when Democrats got in charge again, their majorities were so slim and they had such bulkiness in the Senate as well. Manchin, Sinema, and others, would be a pain, that they were never able to revise any of these tax codes. Well, I think it's going to have to take a really big shakeup then to get to the point where it becomes obvious the things that we need to do. And otherwise, we're going to be mired in an oligarch banana republic mode where the people who have the private yachts and the private planes and the gated communities and the ginormous bank accounts just get richer and richer and richer, and everybody else is scraping around on the bottom. That's the way a lot of that was in the 19th century. That's why we had a progressive movement. That's why we had a lot of labor troubles, major strikes that were national, and violent uprisings and the like. If you push to the level where you're having a choice between starving or going 1789 French Revolution, that's gotten too bad. And we've gotten kind of coddled by 80 years of reasonable presidents. Even independent of party, they've tended to try to avoid being really stupid. And you had occasional veering problems with Nixon and some of the things that the Reagan administration did in various ways, but they still had kind of their foot planted, at least most ways, in reality. But the Trumpistas, and Donald Trump in particular, is untethered to reality. He lives in a very insular bubble. He literally doesn't get out much. He hasn't been getting out much for decades. He lives in his little golden apartments, and he takes the private elevator to the private limo that takes him to the private plane that takes him to a place where he blathers on about toilet flushing, and then he goes back to wherever he was. And he doesn't get out much. He watches Fox, Trump, Pravda, and very limited set of data that repeat mantras. That's why so many of the people that he sees on television are going to be heading the government, including Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense. So anyway, yeah, well, there was Cleveland. Yes, all of that. Vice President Vance was blathering on about all of the left-wing rioters killing people and all that. Needless to say, the reporter did not ask him for source documentation. So blah, blah, blah. Until we get source methods ingrained in this, we're going to be making the same mistakes all over again, where all you have are dueling upper-level ideologies and opinion fests. And they're not grounding things on reality, because if you don't, reality bites. Just as the COVID virus didn't give a rat's ass about what President Trump's press secretary was saying, so too the dynamics of the economy and climate change and all the rest are going to do their thing independent of what the press agent wants. And Mr. Trump wants to constantly bluff and bluster. Eventually he's going to reach the stage when things fall apart enough that he's going to be booed and really fiery at his own rallies, which he'll be addicted to still. And at that point, maybe some people will see him act so derisively and him not on their side. So how many years it's going to take to get to that point is depending on how closely our current world is mirroring 1929. Let's see. Interesting experiment. Be fun to see. Won't it be exciting for Marketplace to actually be able to observe a depression firsthand with modern reporting techniques and technology? Golden opportunity that I would have preferred that we not do. But don't blame me. I voted for Harris. So anyway, we'll see you all next week. Next week will be another installment of our Casey Luskin Brigade. There's going to be some little cute new papers on all of that to look at. It's going to be a shit show the next 4 years, although I think I am anticipating the Trumpistas have 1 year of running amok, because once shit starts hitting fans, now you have a different dynamic. And yes, it's going to get dicey and nasty, and people are going to be pushing things, and there's going to be, but I think if you have the equivalent of a bonus army marching on Trump golf courses to act as squatters and demand aid from the oligarchs, these can be coming from Trump's former supporters. And remember, they're armed to the teeth because of all of these decades of loose gun laws. So whoop-de-doodle, it's going to be an interesting little time. And if you have millions of people dislodged and disrupted, there's no security service on earth that's going to be able to keep that from overwhelming you. So anyway, going to be an exciting and interesting 4 years. Now, no, our little numbers are rolling. Anyway, so I may be dropping out and mess on the signal. If so, I apologize. We put our adverts up. Everything's there. Watch out for safety in every circumstance. Keep an eye out for the wooden penguins. They'll turn on you. And we will be all seeing you kids next week.